Thank you very much, everyone, for joining today's webinar, for skipping your lunch and talk about food tech. That's a special kind of challenge. Quick introduction here. My name is Thomas Ackermann. I'm the Managing Director of SICTIC. I'm joined with my colleague and board member, Michel Kertai, who will co-moderate this webinar today, as we explore a topic that is very new to SICTIC, actually, and it's going to be super interesting, so very much looking forward to hear from our experts. Before we go into the details of today's webinar, I would like to thank our partner and sponsor, the Ernst Göhner Stiftung, that helps us make these webinars a possibility. It really helps us to help educate investors in Switzerland. Quick introduction about SICTIC, who we are, what we do for those of you who are new to SICTIC or have never heard of us before. SICTIC is a community. We are Switzerland's largest business angel club. We are a non-profit organization under Swiss law, and our mission is really to connect Swiss early-stage tech startups with smart money investors. To give you a bit of an impression, what I mean when I say by largest community, we are more than 500 investors. The majority are angel investors, so people investing part of their private money into early-stage Swiss tech startups. But of course, we also have a large network of VCs and family offices in our community. If you are not a SICTIC investor yet, but you are interested in early-stage Swiss tech startups, be that ICT or food tech or whatever, or you would just simply like to learn about how to become an investor and how to really improve your skills, we have a limited offer here today that is valid until the end of the month. Join us, sign up via sictic.ch/investors and use the promo code SICTICwebinar, and we'll give you a discount on the membership fee, on the sign-up fee actually, of 250 francs. Limited offer for those who move fast. The reason why we do today's webinar is that we are actually organizing a Food Tech Investor Day coming up in March. You can find the details on our website, sictic.ch/events. We can also register for the event. Very much looking forward. It's going to be our first Investor Day where we show Swiss food tech startups, early stage food tech startups to our investor community. And we also have a couple of educational elements with a couple of interesting panel conversations. And today's webinar is kind of the lead up to that event. If you haven't signed up yet, feel free, go ahead, sign up via sictic.ch/events and join us for this on-site event at Trust Square in Zurich, which is actually close to Paradeplatz, so very easy to reach. And with that, enough of my advertising here. I would like to welcome our two expert speakers here today on stage. I would like to welcome Françoise Birnholz, who is an experienced angel investor, and Dr. Daniel Böhi, who is, of course, investor as well, but also co-founder and member of Alphorn Venture Partners. And I would like to ask both of you to briefly introduce yourself, because you can do that much better than I ever could. Françoise, please, short introduction.
Hello, I'm Françoise Birnholz. I'm a lawyer by training, and I worked for many years in and with financial institutions. At the same time, I was on the board of startup platforms, and over a period of 8 years, we helped investors to make selection on over 60 investments. I was not a food tech specialist. My thing, because of my background, is more fintech, but I was interested in the area. So I started attending seminars, meeting with founders, and building an education. So I hope you will join us soon.
Yeah, hello, my name is Daniel Böhi. I'm economist. I have like 3 parts of my career. The first 10 years I spent in the corporate food world all around the globe. The next 10 years was as a partner in a private equity company focusing on food companies as well. I was running the portfolio companies with a turnover of roughly 1.5 billion. And since 2015, I'm focusing actually on the Founder Institute, helping startups all around the globe, but mostly in food tech, to kind of get funded up and running. I am on several boards. The largest that I'm is Fortenova, which is a 7 billion turnover company in Eastern Europe. And of course, a food tech investor. And last 2 years, focusing very much on building a scale-up facility for food tech companies in Switzerland, helping or aiming to help food tech companies to scale within a certain specific technology that we're focusing on.
Amazing. So, Thomas, shall we kick it off, the fireside chat with our two participants?
Michel, please
ready?
kick it off.
Okay. So, like the first question, I have is like, what is actually food tech? Like how broad is it? What is its scope? Like, what are the verticals? I mean, can you, give us some background about it? Maybe, first start with Daniel and then go over to Françoise.
Okay, so I think there is no really clear definition of what really food tech incorporates. I mean, what is not tech today? So anything that has an AI inside or some algorithm kind of is tech. But in a more narrow sense, we do understand under food tech companies that are trying to solve some of the most imminent food system issues and challenges that we have in the world with more deep tech solutions. And just to give one of these, it's probably anything related to precision fermentation or cell-based food, such as cell-based meat. But as well, things that started far earlier, like all the delivery services that back then were trying to kind of use idle capacities to kind of improve delivery services and so on. So the space is very large because it's really coming from the very beginning, from the soil till kind of the fork. And at the soil, of course, it encompasses all kind of things such as well farming, where it's about smart farming, precise farming, how do you use pesticides and how do you use water irrigation systems, how do you kind of figure out where you need to work and so on, till at the very end with the consumer, how to avoid waste, how to manage the fridge. I mean, it's such a vast topic, and you need to be aware that the food industry, with $7 trillion turnover globally, is by far the largest and one of the most profitable industries. So, of course, there are many verticals. But when I speak about food tech, or when we speak about food tech, we're trying to a little bit limit it on the new trend of what is related to the topic of how to kind of change the food system the way it has been historically developing. That's kind of a little bit trying to focus.
Perfect. Françoise, anything to add from your end?
Well,
on this?
Daniel has very well mentioned all the definitions or verticals of food tech. I would like to give examples that everybody knows in Switzerland of what could be considered as food tech, because anything that gathers data, that has AI, that has an algorithm, could be deemed to be food tech. So we have Farmi, the fresh food delivery service that developed in the last 3 or 4 years, for example, could be food tech because they have a platform that manages the connection with the farmers, the inventory, the logistics, and all kinds of things like this. Then something that may not be known, one of the big ones is AgroSustain, that has developed a spray that makes produces having a longer shelf life, for example. But any of the delivery services could count as food tech. We have all heard about the new food meat developed from cells instead of killing the animals. These are all food tech examples, and there are many, many more.
All right. Thomas, over to you for the next question.
Thank you very much for this overview. Just a quick note to the audience. Of course, we are more than happy to answer questions from the audience as well. If you do have any questions, please do type them into the Q&A section, which you can find at the bottom of the window, and we'll then make sure that the panelists address these questions as well. So, Daniel, Françoise, thank you very much for giving a quick overview of these different food tech topics. I understand that some of them actually are closely related to ICT, but there's also very novel aspects like the precision fermentation, etc., etc. My question is actually, why do you, as a person, as an individual, why do you care? Why do you believe in food tech, and also why do you invest in food tech? What is your motivation, and maybe what is also the underlying trend that you see in a broader economic landscape? And maybe this time we start with Françoise and then hand over to Daniel.
There is a very selfish reason first. I love food. But then, I think everybody nowadays is looking at the environment and the waste and the getting food from all over the world, and that's not a good thing. Also, you can be concerned about not killing animals if possible. So there are many, many reasons why food tech is important, and the first one being to be able to feed the world.
Yeah, I mean, me as well. I can very much support the point of loving food. So I mean, that's probably anyone likes to gather around and eat something very nice. But there is indeed something really far more fundamental and important going on. Why food is so interesting to invest right now. When you think about it and look at the history of food, the last 11,000 years, nothing changed. We're doing the business the same way we've done 11,000 years ago, except that around the 1990s, we all of a sudden introduced oil. That's why we have fertilizers, pesticides, automation, processes, which allowed us to increase the yield massively. So if we did not have the oil, and I always like to say, actually, we're eating fossil fuels. If we hadn't had that, we would be able to feed around 3.5 billion people. But we're getting towards 10 billion people. And the question is, how do you feed that? So the way the food system has developed over the last 60, 70, 80 years actually came with a lot of side effects. Yes, we were feeding more people, but at the same time, we had greenhouse gas emissions, plastic, obesity, malnutrition, waste, famine, all these kind of things that actually just show that the food system as it is not sustainable. You cannot continue like that. So in order to kind of deal with these side effects, several states started to kind of introduce sugar taxes, plastic bans, stuff like that. But all of that is not going to really solve it. So actually, there has been a big movement around the world, including corporates, investors, science, and people that really are envisioning a totally new way of doing and growing and processing and eating food, which is going towards a system where you kind of don't need arable land or as little as possible. Today, we're using 40% of the land we're using for that. So how could we kind of use less arable land? How can we be more climate independent? It's a fact that things are changing and we need to kind of adjust towards that. Increased food security, food as health and nutrition, all these kind of things are kind of coming to a point where they need solutions, and we are technically now more advanced with AI, human genome, robotics that allow to bring all these solutions at hand. And what is that solution? The solution is that actually it's more and more feasible to what we call domesticization of microorganisms, which is a way to kind of grow and process food in a very untypical way and very new way. And this is actually like when you compare it a little bit to the electric car vehicle, where there is a new technology emerging, but it requires a total new setup in an industry to kind of evolve. That's exactly happening in the food industry at the moment, and everyone is pitching into it. But it's still very early days. So this is why it's so interesting for people that are more risk takers, like angels, to really start to invest, because there are so many startups in all the different spaces that are pitching into this topic. Either they come from AI, from robotics, from biology, from biomanufacturing, or very different other places where they are trying to kind of bring these solutions towards what I was saying before in terms of vision. And that is actually the place where I think it's interesting for people that are in the audience to participate, and where Switzerland particularly has a fantastic place to kind of start with doing so, but maybe we can talk about that later. But that's actually my basic motivation, like many other people, to really contribute to a change how people eat, to a change how our food system is, towards something far more sustainable and able to kind of feed the 10 billion people in a healthy, fair, and sustainable manner.
If I may try to summarize what you just said, we have a couple of driving forces that are coming together right now. One of them is the population growth, of course. There's the increase of awareness in terms of sustainability and environmental awareness, which also ties to new regulations. You mentioned plastic ban and sugar regulations. We have new technology that is coming up that can start to come together. And all that combined with if I simplify it, with the outdated way of producing food that we still rely on nowadays. Does that sum it up more or less?
Yeah, I think you can sum it up like that. It's a perfect moment of doing business in this field, precisely for all the elements you were summarizing.
All right. And Daniel, you just finish your point with saying, okay, like in particular Switzerland, is like an interesting place to invest in food tech. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes. So one of the things I mentioned, what we're up to, we're setting up a scale-up Foodtech scale-up hub where companies, food tech companies, startups can scale, and we're doing that in Switzerland, and that has a very specific reason why we're doing that in Switzerland. Because when you look around the globe, where is the most innovative countries in this space? It's Singapore, it's Israel, it's Holland, it's parts of the US, and more growing as well, Switzerland. And it has to do with geography. It has to do with the fact that these countries have very limited space, that they are not really able to grow food in a very easy way, especially Singapore. They have no cows, yet they want to become food secure or independent by 2030 and have everything around 30-40% of the food produced in this city. So Switzerland is in a way in a similar situation as well. We don't have that much arable land. It's very scarce, and we need to find a way how to produce the food in a way to guarantee food security. And on top of that, Switzerland is geographically very dense, which allows, in a way, food startups to really have Switzerland as a fantastic test market, because consumers are close, they're willing to test, they are more affluent and are more willing to kind of spend for new things. There are, of course, the large corporates in Switzerland, and Switzerland is one of the few countries in the world that is really very strong in food. I mean, not only Nestle, but we have agro companies, we have different things. We as well, in this new food system, the pharmaceutical technology will be center stage, where you use bioreactors, media, stuff like that to really grow the food. This is where, of course, our pharmaceutical companies, with all their know-how in medtech, all their know-how in pharmatech, how do you grow cells, and so on, are becoming key. Last but least, of course, we have money and we have the academia. So ETH and EPFL and ZHW and all these companies, all these institutions are very well advanced. There is a company called Mirai Foods that comes out of ZHW and ETH to some extent, which is a company not many people know about in Switzerland, a startup that really is breaking ground in very interesting way. And that is just an example. We need far more of that. We're not yet ready in a way in Switzerland to kind of compete with Israel and Singapore, because these countries have an industry policy to really promote these topics. In Switzerland, we don't use industry policies. We're very vague. Still, we believe that Switzerland is an ideal place, test market, to really kind of have this techno-economical modeling and scaling. And once this is there, you go into the large markets like Germany, US, whatever you think it's right for you.
I would like to add to what Daniel told us, that because of this ecosystem, because of this history, it's relatively easy for an investor who doesn't know anything to get an education, because you have so many events, so many institutions, so much that you can participate in, that you can learn enough to start in this area.
Fantastic. And so now we have a couple of trends coming together. We have Switzerland as a potential innovation hub for food tech, and we have actually tons of questions coming in from the audience. So let me try to summarize a little bit and ask you, maybe that's a question for Françoise. Why do you think now is the right time to start looking at food tech? And building on that question, we can then go into more technical topics of angel investing as well.
Well, for me, as a beginner investor in the area, it's because with my previous experience, I discovered what was happening in Israel and in Singapore. And these are, as Daniel said, also small countries that don't have a lot of land. And immediately I thought, and why not Switzerland? And then I came back and said, oops, I didn't know there are similar ecosystems in Switzerland. And, I think COVID had good side effects. We were all stuck for a couple of years, and we looked at the world. In fact, that was an awakening for me, and I thought we had to do something so that food become more sustainable. So the moment is now.
So then let me weave in a couple of questions from the audience here. And one question is actually building on what has been addressed around environmental issues related to farming and meat production. So one person is asking that cultivated meat or clean meat has the potential to address many of these issues, health related, environment related, the whole topic of antibiotic resistance, etc. But what is still missing? What needs to happen for these technologies or innovations to really break through? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, maybe I can tap into that, because that's exactly what we're doing. So look, there's one thing that really separates food tech from IT. IT, and that's why as well, I never like to apply IT, this agile organization or the philosophy of IT too much to food tech. Food tech, one of the things that is crucial is you need to make it available, affordable, and it needs to taste, which is actually something you might be able to do in a lab to some extent, but it's minuscule. The key point is to scale it. Scaling, though, is to a large extent an engineering issue. And when you start to scale into larger quantities that really get an impact and replace the volumes of meat and dairy or whatever you have, that is a gigantic investment and engineering leap that needs to be done, like in the electric car industry, to set up all these charging setups. So what is missing actually is not that much that the science did not come up with cell lines, that they know how to grow in what medium, what bioreactor, how to separate, how to kind of make a steak out of that. What is missing is kind of making that in huge scale. And there are certain physical limits to it. And with the physical limits and with the certain limitations that come from still a lot of work to be done on the yield side, how to grow biomass, how to kind of have a media that is relatively cheap, that's not easy. You need to understand that actually we're trying to grow meat and dairy products without a cow. So a cow is a bioreactor, nothing else, if you look at it in a simple way. So how do you replace and build a bioreactor? This engineering feat is not an easy thing to do. And so far, we do have solutions. And what we're doing is precisely providing the infrastructure for startups so they can kind of make their economical economical model fit in a perfect way, so they can then start to really invest into this type of industry. But to give you an idea, if you really then want to have a proper setup, that costs millions that you need to put into the upstream bioreactors, that you put into the operation, the downstream equipment of separator, of filtration, of mixing, of drying, whatever you want to do. So the point is, we cannot source that out. The industry, the technology does not exist. There is some know-how from the pharma industry, how to produce whatever vaccines or how to grow tissue engineering. But to make that in the scale that food needs is a very different topic. To make it at the price points that food needs is a different topic. And so all the elements exist, but it will still take time to put the puzzle in a proper way together, so we're really kind of having the impact. It will come, and it's already happening in many places. That's why I am personally a bit desperate how Switzerland is slow when it comes to this kind of things, to make an effort and control these technologies. Other countries are just, you know, leaping forward and just doing it. But that is the limiting factor. It's not the money. It's still a lot about engineering and science, biology, being able to really drive the yield of these kind of things.
In addition, because this is new, you have the regulations. They are behind. It's very heavy these days to obtain authorization for something that is for human consumption. And the laws have been made at a time when all these innovations didn't exist. And of course, it's different in Switzerland than it is in the EU, than it is in other countries. So you still need lawyers, sorry.
Is something happening on that end, Françoise? You know, lawmakers, you know, is something happening, you know, on that end, you know, to ease regulations, to facilitate,
yes, but as Daniel said, it takes time. It's very slow. Yeah.
Maybe I can add one comment here, and that's another reason why Switzerland. There are two relevant things. Switzerland, unlike EU, has a very liberal food manufacturing law. So it's actually kind of, in a very simple way, you can produce food as long as it's safe. Okay, so EU is far more regulated. When it comes to novel food, EFCA, FDA approval, stuff like that, again, Switzerland in principle is just following EU regulations, but does not have to. Switzerland can actually do whatever it wants, such as does Singapore, as Israel, as other countries. So one of the things that we have been setting up an organization with several people, looking into making a law, setting up a law that allows a sandbox principles, which is test it, do it, experiment, try something. If it works out, we still can adjust the law. That is the beauty about Switzerland, that actually, like with these electric trottinets that in many places are not allowed, yet they say, try it out. This very liberal approach is something we need to take advantage of, because that sets free all the innovation and brings together all these breakthrough technologies to really release the power that they have. But where I agree, it still requires a little bit of an effort, and that's of Swiss Food Nutrition Valley. It requires of SICTIC, of investors, of lawmakers, of academia to say, hey, let's just allow this to happen. Let's make a law that is this sandbox regulation, and let's experiment. And that can be done relatively fast.
Amazing. Thanks both of you for elaborating on that. And Thomas, you just, would you like to, tackle another question from the audience? Because you raised your hand. Okay. Can I give it over to you?
Oh, did I? Oh, that was my accident. Yeah, so we looked a bit at the trends. We looked a bit about around the environment in Switzerland. Now let's dig a little bit into, what does it really mean to invest in a food tech startup in Switzerland? How do you scale a startup? What's the life cycle of a startup? Let's explore these couple of questions a little bit. We actually have one question from the audience that goes right into that direction. It's a question from Peter. Peter says, in the B2B business, according to his experience, corporate customers are not very open and or receptive to new technologies. Now, of course, in Switzerland, there's a lot of corporates around related to food tech. What is your experience with specifically for food tech startups in Switzerland when it comes to collaborating with a corporate partner? Whoever wants to go first.
I'm not known for being politically correct, so I might spit a little bit on my alma mater and where I came from and who educated me at the very beginning of my career, a company in the far west of Switzerland. So it's true. I mean, the large corporates are hesitant to do certain innovation, not because they are against innovation, not at all, but you need to understand one thing. The basic principle why a food company is profitable is because they manage to make on a limited capital density a very huge economies of scale. That's a franchise technology. They try to leverage that as long as intensively as they can. Some of the food manufacturing equipment can be 40, 50, 60 years old, okay? And that's how it runs. So for them to kind of invest into very new technology is not an easy thing. Again, it's like when Tesla came with the electric car, all of the corporates were kind of pulling back, although they had the technology, but they were set up on a very different platform. And that takes time. And my experience is that actually the large food corporates are very much interested. They are just figuring out how exactly the scaling can happen and how they can integrate that into their business models, which is not an easy task to do. So the way that all of the investments that I have been doing, all the companies I have been advising, is that in some specific cases, there is a perfect collaboration between the corporates and the startups. The startups very often then a little bit get into the dependency or depend on the corporates in some aspects, and that has another angle. But at the end of the day, many others actually just really pull through one round after the other till they get towards an IPO or something similar like that. When they really have a critical size of whatever, 50 million turnover or 100 million turnover as a company, and then are easily kind of private equity M&A type of acquisition. And I think what startups and scale-ups need to stop thinking about is that they can only get into business if they go through corporates. It's not correct. It's not the way that you need to look at developing. It's one way, but it's actually not the most favorable and not the most promising path. And that's not for Switzerland. That I see that everywhere. I see that in Israel, no matter if you call it the kitchen and Strauss Group behind, actually it's really not depending so much on the corporate partner behind.
And then can you specify a little bit what what the potential possible path are, instead of going with a corporate?
I mean, there's so many other alternatives that you can, of course, develop. When most of the startups, they believe that a corporate is requiring for the route to market, for the go-to market, selling the products and stuff like that. But that is not necessarily the case. There are very different ways of selling your product. Again, it very much depends on what is your business model. If you're having a business model with a consumer product, there are different ways of selling that. If your business model in food tech is a B2B model, because you develop certain specific recipes or have a very specific way of producing certain proteins that are of use for many players. Again, there are different routes of selling your products to the consumer or to your clients afterwards. And it has to be looked at very specifically, but it's not. I'm just trying to kind of move the needle away or encourage people. You can start a startup or a scale it up without having the corporate as the only solution. But it has to be evaluated and looked at. There are many small and medium enterprises, by the way, that are very eager to kind of jump on top of this because they are more entrepreneurial. They are the ones that very often do not have the money to go into R&D. So it's rather on the side of the small, medium enterprises that you can do several things. And of course, it's looking beyond Switzerland. Switzerland is really, for me, not even a startup nation. It's kind of a scale-up nation that prepares for scaling. And then you really go to the larger markets and conquer them, a little bit like Planted is trying to do with their products in France and Germany and other places.
Yeah, I'd like to add something about corporates and especially large corporates. That's the lawyer in me. Big corporation, and let's blame the US for that, are worried about being sued and about all these class actions for anything and everything. So they kind of like to outsource new stuff, research and development, and if they see something that is proven, then they will buy the company. But the risk of litigations are so huge, especially in the US, a bit in the UK also, that they don't want to take risk because this is food. So a human could get sick or worse, could die.
Thanks for pointing out that angle. Thomas, okay, if move a little bit into how to invest in food tech companies and what are the valuations that nowadays apply, what are like exit scenarios, exit opportunities, and so on. All right, then let's get started. So Daniel and Françoise, I mean, maybe first, Françoise, I mean, what are you looking for when you invest in a food tech company, and like what is the I would say like the standard route for a food tech company? How do they grow?
Well, I start just like with any other company in any business. I look at what it is they are doing, and first I must understand more or less what it does. Otherwise, I won't even touch it. And then, does it solve a problem? Is there demand for what they are doing? That's the same as with any other company. And then I look at the team. For me, the founders and the team are very, very important. Then Daniel will take over from there. The scaling is different because you need, labs, factories, transportation, etc. The capital needed to scale is much larger than for something that is only tech. and that's where it changes. Daniel, you want to take over?
Yeah, I mean, thank you. I think what I look, besides, of course, the obvious things like, is it the problem? Is there some IP? Is there tech around? Actually, what I'm really looking at, what is actually the competitive advantage that is hard to replicate? And unlike IT, where the competitive advantage that is hard to replicate very often relies on maybe some kind of an algorithm or some kind of a tech that you have, in food, you really need to understand how do these different elements come together so you can scale. I look at any food tech company always through the angle of scaling. Are they able to kind of bring it into a dimension where you really are able to reduce the costs? Are there really economies of scale coming in? How hard is the scaling? What are the gatekeeper technologies that you require to kind of come down and get into this hard to replicate competitive advantage? And when I see a company that brings all these things together and really build a platform out, I know that is where I'm building. To give you an example, I invested into an Israeli company that is in microalgae. And they have not only the strain, they don't only know how to grow the strain, they build an entire bioreactor, an entire AI system, an entire with light understanding how you need to grow, how to have the process. They built an entire process of how to do that. So these were people who kind of started out with, oh, we want to solve the protein issue, and we want to do that with algae. And a tech company would have gone to the lab and understood which of the algae strains to take and how to grow it. A food company understands, how do I make it big? How do I make it massive? That's where the difference is, where you need to look. Are they just tech oriented or are they food oriented? That's why I kind of look at the difference, food tech. And the food part is where the scaling philosophy comes in. And do they understand what are the elements that the building blocks that are at the end bringing the competitive advantage that is hard to replicate? That is where then this peculiar algae company is producing a microalgae that produces blood replacement for plant-based burger at a cost that nobody else can produce it. And then they are the only one. They have a monopoly rent and everyone is trying to get it from there. That's when you have a really interesting business that will from there either scale up or scale out.
I want to add something. And of course, as I mentioned, I try to educate myself and I try to find experts such as Daniel that show an interest, and I follow.
Yeah.
Actually, I have a follow-up question on that, if I may quickly jump in. So it sounds to me like, scaling a food tech company is a piece of work. That's not something that just happens organically, as it might, with a viral mobile app or something like that, where things can happen by accident as well. So my question is now, looking through the eyes of an angel investor, is it worth it? What can you, as an angel, can you actually move the needle, and how can you help scale a food tech company?
Well, I mean, putting myself into either position of an investor or a position as somebody who is looking for people to onboard, I think you need to understand a little bit of manufacturing. I think when somebody wants to invest into food tech and comes with the idea of, okay, let's make a product market fit, this kind of ideas of, let me help you understand how to fit with consumer needs. That is a dangerous thing, because that's, as I said, is only a small part of the cake. You need to understand that food tech takes far more time. So from the moment it starts till there is something, it is not about weeks and months till it's in the app store. I'm just making black and white comparison. It really takes far more time. So you need to have the ability to be patient. you need the ability as well to kind of stand by and know when you can contribute and when you cannot contribute. Because if you're an investor that understands the potential of a technology, let's say precision fermentation or cell-based, and you say that's a future technology, but actually I cannot do anything, then just invest and be silent. If you can be of help because you either understand engineering or you understand biology or you understand consumer, then maybe there is something. But what I always kind of think is wrong is if somebody tries to invest because he thinks he can contribute actively with something that is not necessarily required or needed. Sometimes it's just about really being willing to kind of give the money and then help these people really just to bring all the right knowledge and everything together. That is very often far more important because unlike Israel and Singapore and US investors that are extremely impatient, Swiss investors have this big advantage. They normally are more patient in that. And in food tech, that's the most important thing. I have seen in Israel so many fantastic companies going down the drain because the investors simply after half a year were knocking on the door and said, where's my money? And then you say, hey, hold on. I mean, you don't know where you invested. So it is somehow between probably IT and pharma, medtech, somewhere in between is food tech in terms of know-how, competence, time frame, ability, and the returns that you can make are really, really huge. I mean, there is a big spread, of course, but just go into the history of the last 15 years in terms of food tech exits, starting from delivery till some strong biotech-oriented companies. There's many of them that show what is the potential return.
Yeah, but Daniel, I think food tech is no different from any other investment in startup. You have to count a 5 to 10 years delay before you, if you're lucky, you get a profit or your money back.
I agree. I just see what other people's expectations are, and they're completely wrong. And I always as well say when people ask me, okay, shall I invest? I just say, invest if you can lose it. Then go. If you cannot lose it, then don't. Then put your money on some, I don't know where you want to put it, but this is
maybe
really
not in
game.
the bank these days.
Maybe not.
Françoise, what you just mentioned, 5 to 10 years. I mean, that's what we usually say in ICT as well. So is that a realistic time frame in food tech as well, or is it, in a very different league?
No, it's the same.
It's the same.
That's an interesting point.
It's the same. You know why, Thomas? Because in food tech, there are, as it is the largest market, there is far more exit and follow-up possibility. So it actually kind of the scaling up and the investment and all these kind of things might be a bit more difficult to really achieve. But as there are so many people interested in the topic, so many potential people to acquire and target, that's where it kind of plays in, that actually at the end of the day, it really goes relatively fast. At the beginning, it might be a little bit slow, but then it really goes into the exponential path. It's like the lily pond, example. It takes 28 days till you get to half of the lily pond. And in the last 2 days, you fill it, So that's actually very typical for food tech. And that's why you need to have the confidence and the trust in the people that it takes long time like that. And then it kind of goes up.
Okay, and then Daniel and Françoise, maybe you can tap in on a little bit into that, exit, into those exit opportunities. I think that might be of interest to our investors. And Daniel, you just mentioned, that they're like manifold. And can you, quickly, walk us through, about, the exit, landscape and what are like the, the valuations, what are, the buyers, what exit, scenarios you could, envisage as an investor?
I mean, I think this is such a broad, and I mean, it's again in food tech, it's such a broad topic, and it so much depends on the geographies. I think in Switzerland we have very, very few examples of exits, and this. You need to go to Singapore, you need to go to Israel, you need to go to US to see what, and Germany, of course, what are these returns and multiples and valuations. One thing that drives valuations, for instance, in Israel, is the fact that, of course, pension funds can invest there into the startups. So IPOs and how IPOs are structured in Israel is actually one of the reasons why in Israel you have so many food tech companies pushing for an IPO and getting valuations anything between 50 to 500 million, because that's where they're pushing at the end of the day. And then, of course, there are other possibilities for an exit, which is the corporate world. But what I've seen there is that at the end of the day, there are very different strategies. Some of them try to get the companies very early on, and others are really waiting to have a more solid business. So again, you cannot kind of generalize what exactly, but again, look into how much money is going into alternative proteins at the moment. You can see how much these companies are valued. I've just now looked at the company in Israel in synthetic biology that is actually going into how to take or how certain cells are supposed to behave. That's what they do for CRISPR technologies and stuff like that. This company just raised $15 million and has not even been formed. So what is going on in certain parts of the world is very crazy. We, thanks God, don't have that in Switzerland. But in other parts of the world, it's really very, very exaggerated. And it's kind of really defined as a new hype. So that's why I'm saying it's very hard to kind of try to get to certain solid numbers that you could compare. Switzerland in general is cheaper. But Switzerland very often then as well, because the founders might look at Switzerland as a limitation instead of going ahead as well. Don't ever think, okay, I might find an exit in San Francisco and go to the Silicon Valley or go to some other places where they can get into an IPO. That is as well a mentality of our startups and founders in Switzerland that is a bit restricting. They should be far more ambitious and aggressive in terms of where and how they could grow.
And by the way, it is one of the things I look at when I discuss with the founders is whether from the very beginning they think global, because that's important. Even if there is no company yet, the business plan is still sketchy. But if they think very local, it may be a good business, but it's not a scalable business.
All right, I think we have to keep a quick look on the clock. And actually, we have so many more questions from the audience. It's impossible to answer all of them. Of course, if you have more questions about food tech or you would like to learn more or discover a couple of Swiss food tech startups, please make sure you sign up for our Food Tech Investor Day happening on March 9th at the Trust Square in Zurich, close to the Paradeplatz. Few more words about, let me move the slide here. If you're new to SICTIC, new to angel investing, we have angel lunches happening all over Switzerland. Next one taking place here at the end of February. If you're a SICTIC investor and you would like to network, these lunches are always a fantastic opportunity. Then, as I mentioned, March 9th, Foodtech Investor Day, followed a week later by our next ICT Investor Day at Google in Zurich as well. For our Romandie investors, we have our upcoming event on April 5th, which is going to be focused around PropTech, InsurTech, FinTech at La Vaudoise Assurance in Lausanne. A quick word about how SICTIC facilitates investing in Swiss companies. I'm not going to into too much detail here, just a very brief overview. We have our investor days where selected startups pitch. They have been selected by a jury. At each Investor Day, after the pitches, we ask the audience for feedback. Are you interested in learning more about the startup? Yes or no? And if you're interested, then we invite you into a deep dive session, which is a 1-hour presentation given by the founders. So at the end of this deep dive, you should have enough information about the startups to decide whether or not you want to engage in due diligence. You will then get access to the data room provided by the startups. We organize due diligence kickoff, and we guide you along the way of this matchmaking process with the goal to help close the round here. If you're a startup and you haven't applied to SICTIC yet, if you're looking to fundraise now or in the next few weeks or months, make sure you apply. You can find more information on sictic.ch/startups. If you're an investor who's interested in investing and would like to learn how the Swiss ecosystem looks, what you need to know, all the do's and don'ts and best practices of investing in early stage startups in Switzerland, take a look at our Swiss Angel Investor Handbook, which gives you a good overview of everything you need to know. And of course, also our academy, where we have recordings of our webinars, such as this one today, as well as a couple of educational videos that you can access for free. Again, if you're not a SICTIC investor yet, here's your opportunity to sign up at a discount. It's valid until the end of the month. Make sure you enter this promo code SICTIC webinar. Join as an investor via sictic.ch/investors. And with that, I will stop my advertising speech. I'll bring up our panelists again, and I would like to thank you both for all this expertise, for these insights that you shared today, for taking the time. Of course, it was very inspiring, very educational. I myself learned a lot. I hope for the audience it was also interesting and not expiring, but inspiring. Of course, very much looking forward to connecting further. Françoise, Daniel, if people from the audience have more questions, would like to learn more, would you be willing, able? Fantastic. People can find you on LinkedIn, or they can also reach out to us, and we can make sure that we put everyone in touch. Also, thank you very much, Michel, for co-hosting, co-moderating with me today. Any last words from anyone?
Just invest into food tech to make this world a little bit more sustainable, healthy, and better. That would be nice.
Tastier.
Tastier.
And tastier.
Of course. Juicy.
I like that a lot.
Make the world better, healthier, and juicier and tastier. Sounds like a good motto. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a fantastic afternoon. See you around soon. Don't forget 9th of March, Foodtech Day in Zurich at Trust Square. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.